The base armory at 3:47 hours was supposed to be empty. Captain Nix Vega had counted on it. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she methodically cleaned her M24 SWS, each component laid out with surgical precision on the worn metal table. 3 years of flying combat missions had taught her that some rituals were sacred. The rifle wasn't even her primary weapon anymore. She'd transitioned to rotary wing 2 months ago. But muscle memory demanded respect for the tools that had kept her breathing through Helmand Province. The heavy door creaked behind her. She didn't turn, recognizing the deliberate footsteps of someone accustomed to moving through hostile territory. Staff Sergeant Cade Thorne emerged from the shadows between the weapon racks, his ghillie suit draped over one arm like a second skin. The 75th Ranger Regiment's most decorated marksman moved with the fluid economy of a predator, every gesture calculated to waste neither energy nor opportunity. His pale eyes swept the armory with practiced assessment before settling on her work. Midnight maintenance. His voice carried the gravelly undertone of someone who'd spent too many nights whispering coordinates through radio static. That's dedication for a flybo. Nix continued her cleaning ritual, the soft scrape of the cleaning rod against rifling the only response she offered. Thorne stepped closer, his gaze falling on the pristine weapon components. The M24 had seen combat, the subtle wear patterns told stories of sand, sweat, and the weight of lives hanging in the balance. But something about the weapon's condition spoke to a level of care that transcended mere military protocol. "Heard you transferred out of Scout Sniper," Thorne continued, settling against the opposite table with casual confidence. "Word is you couldn't handle the pressure when it counted. Too much thinking, not enough instinct." The provocation hung in the air like cordite smoke, deliberate and poisonous. Nix finally looked up, her dark eyes reflecting none of the emotion churning beneath the surface. Word travels fast around here. Her hands never paused in their work, thumb checking the bolt extension with practiced efficiency. Sometimes word's wrong. Thorne's smile was razor-thin. Maybe, or maybe some people are better suited for different kinds of warfare. He gestured toward the window where the silhouettes of Black Hawks squatted on the tarmac like sleeping giants. Altitude has a way of keeping things distant. The challenge crystallized in the space between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Nix assembled her rifle with movements so fluid they seemed choreographed, each component sliding into place with mechanical poetry. When she finished, she met Thorne's stare with Arctic composure. "What did you have in mind?" Thorne's grin widened as he produced a range card from his cargo pocket, the paper worn smooth from handling. "There's a target at 3,800 meters. Winds tricky at that distance, thermals off the desert floor, crosswinds at elevation. Most shooters can't even see it without optics." He slid the card across the table with theatrical precision. "But I figure someone with your reputation might find it interesting." The silence stretched between them like a taut bowstring. Nick studied the range card, noting the elevation changes, wind data, and atmospheric conditions. Her finger traced the trajectory calculations with the unconscious movement of someone fluent in the mathematics of death. Thorne watched her every micro-expression, searching for doubt, hesitation, or the crack in composure that would confirm his assumptions. 3,800 meters, she repeated, her voice flat as desert hardpan. "That's ambitious for a friendly wager. Unless you've got somewhere else to be." Thorne's tone carried just enough condescension to sting. "I understand helicopter pilots keep regular hours." Nick stood with liquid grace, slinging the M24 across her shoulder with movements that spoke to years of practice. The weight settled against her back like an old friend, familiar and comforting despite the months of rotary wing duty that had redefined her relationship with warfare. She'd learned to fight from above the clouds, raining precision fire from the gunner's seat of an Apache. But the rifle remained her first language, the grammar of violence she'd mastered in places where hesitation measured the difference between coming home and coming home in a box. "Lead the way," she said, moving toward the door with purposeful strides. The pre-dawn air carried the bite of desert winter as they emerged from the armory. Overhead, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the drama unfolding below. The range stretched into darkness beyond the perimeter lights, marked by the geometric precision of military organization. Distance markers disappeared into blackness like stepping stones across an ocean of night. Thorne moved ahead with the confidence of someone accustomed to operating in hostile territory, his equipment kit rattling softly against his frame. The sound should have been reassuring, the familiar music of professional competence. Instead, it felt like a countdown timer marking the moments until judgment. The observation deck overlooked the main range from an elevated position designed for training oversight. Thorne produced a spotting scope from his gear bag with ceremonial precision, the lens covers removed with the care reserved for sacred instruments. Below them, the range stretched into darkness like a frozen ocean, the target invisible even to trained eyes. Sodium vapor lights created pools of amber illumination that only emphasized the vast spaces between them. 3,800 meters confirmed, Thorne announced, adjusting the scope's focus with mechanical precision. Target is a 12-inch steel plate mounted on a concrete berm. Wind is currently gusting between 8 and 14 knots from the northwest, with thermals rising off the hardstand every few minutes. He stepped back from the scope like a surgeon yielding the operating table. Conditions are about as challenging as they get without active combat. Nix moved to the firing position with economic grace, dropping into a prone shooting stance that spoke to countless hours of practice. The rifle settled against her shoulder like it belonged there, an extension of her nervous system rather than an external tool. Through the scope, the world compressed to a tunnel of magnified reality. The target swam in and out of focus as atmospheric distortion played havoc with the optics, heat mirages dancing like ghosts across the field of fire. She worked the bolt with practiced smoothness, chambering a match-grade round that represented the pinnacle of ballistic engineering. The brass gleamed dully in the artificial light, each cartridge manufactured to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. At this distance, perfection wasn't just preferred, it was mandatory. The slightest variation in powder charge, bullet weight, or atmospheric pressure would send the projectile wide of its intended mark by margins measured in feet rather than inches. "Clock starts when you break the first shot," Thorne informed her, settling behind his spotting scope with professional detachment. 3 rounds, best group wins. His tone carried the casual confidence of someone accustomed to watching ambitious shooters discover the difference between theory and practice at extreme distance. Nix controlled her breathing, feeling her heart rate slow to the steady rhythm that preceded every shot she'd ever taken in anger. The scope reticle danced slightly with each pulse, requiring her to time the trigger break to the microscopic windows between heartbeats. Wind flags along the range showed the chaotic patterns of air movement that would buffet the bullet during its 3-second flight time. 3 seconds. In combat, that was enough time for everything to change, for targets to move, for cover to disappear, for the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure to crystallize in the space between intention and impact. The first shot broke clean, the rifle's recoil driving straight back through her shoulder with familiar authority. The muzzle flash lit the observation deck in stark relief for a microsecond before darkness reclaimed the space. Through the scope, she tracked the bullet's invisible path across the intervening distance, atmospheric distortion making the target shimmer like a mirage. The steel plate remained silent and still in the pre-dawn gloom. "Miss," Thorne called, his voice carrying professional neutrality tinged with satisfaction. "Wind got you. Bullet passed 2 feet right of target." Nix worked the bolt without comment, ejecting the spent brass in a smooth motion that spoke to automaticity born of repetition. The empty case arced through the air, landing with a metallic ping on the concrete deck. She adjusted her hold, compensating for the wind data Thorne had provided while factoring in her own assessment of atmospheric conditions. The scope picture showed her a world reduced to crosshairs and physics, where success demanded the integration of ballistic science with intuitive understanding, earned through years of sending lead downrange. The second shot felt different the moment her finger touched the trigger. The rifle spoke with authority, its voice echoing across the empty range before being swallowed by the vast silence of the desert beyond. This time, the impact was audible, a distant metallic ring that carried across 3,800 meters of space like a church bell tolling victory. Hit, Thorne's voice carried surprise despite his attempt at professional detachment. Solid contact, 12 o'clock. Nix cycled the bolt for her final round, the mechanical action smooth as silk. Her breathing had achieved the meditative rhythm that marked the difference between shooting and marksmanship, that transcendent state where conscious thought yielded to trained instinct. The crosshairs settled on the target with microscopic precision, wind flags and thermal readings integrating into a ballistic solution that existed more in her nervous system than her conscious mind. The third shot was perfection distilled into kinetic energy. The bullet carved its path through the pre-dawn air with mathematical inevitability, gravity and atmospheric resistance merely variables in an equation she'd solved countless times before. The impact rang clear and true, a metallic note of triumph that seemed to hang in the air longer than physics should have allowed. Jesus Christ, Thorne's professional composure cracked like thin ice. That's a perfect cluster, 3 inches at 3,800 meters. He looked up from the spotting scope with something approaching reverence. That's not shooting, that's something else entirely. Nix rose from the firing position with fluid grace, safing the rifle with movements that spoke to muscle memory forged in places where carelessness killed. The brass casings lay scattered on the concrete like spent prayers, each one representing a moment when skill and circumstance had aligned to create something approaching perfection. The silence that followed carried weight beyond the physical. It was the silence of assumptions being dismantled, of preconceptions crumbling under the weight of demonstrated competence. Thorne stood frozen behind his spotting scope, still processing what he'd witnessed through the magnified lens. In the world of precision shooting, there were levels of skill that existed beyond conventional understanding, plateaus of ability that separated the merely competent from the transcendent. Where did you learn to shoot like that? The question emerged from Thorne without conscious intention, his usual swagger replaced by genuine curiosity tinged with something approaching awe. The numbers didn't lie. 3 shots at extreme distance, grouped tighter than most shooters could manage at half that range under perfect conditions. Nix shouldered the M24 with practiced ease, the weapon's weight distributing evenly across her frame. "Same place you did," she replied, her tone carrying no trace of satisfaction or vindication. "Downrange when it counted." The cryptic answer hung between them as they packed their equipment in ritual silence. Thorne's movements had lost their earlier theatrical confidence, replaced by the methodical efficiency of someone forced to recalibrate their understanding of the world. The range stretched away into darkness, 3,800 meters of space that had just witnessed the quiet demolition of carefully constructed prejudices. As they walked back toward the main complex, their footsteps echoing off the concrete in measured cadence, neither spoke about what had transpired. But something fundamental had shifted in the space between challenge and response, between assumption and reality. The desert air carried the scent of cordite and possibility, while overhead, the first pale hints of dawn began their slow conquest of the eastern horizon. Behind them, the steel target stood unmarked, except for 3 perfectly grouped impact points that would catch the morning sun like silver coins pressed into metal. Evidence of competence that transcended expectation, proof positive that some truths could only be written in the language of ballistic precision and unwavering skill. The armory door closed behind them with finality, sealing away the night's revelations within concrete walls that had witnessed countless similar moments of truth. In the military, reputation was currency, and Nix had just made a deposit that would earn interest for years to come. But the real value of what had transpired couldn't be measured in marksmanship scores or professional standing. It lived in the space between perception and reality, where assumptions went to die, and understanding was born from the marriage of skill and circumstance. Word would travel fast through the base. It always did when someone accomplished something that bordered on the impossible. By morning formation, every soldier on the installation would know that the helicopter pilot had put 3 rounds into a 12-inch target at extreme distance under challenging conditions. The details would shift and amplify with each telling, as stories always did when they moved through the oral tradition of military folklore. "Colonel wants to see you," Thorne said as they reached the main corridor, his voice carrying a weight that hadn't been there an hour earlier. 0800, something about a mission briefing. He paused at the intersection, studying her face for reaction. "Sounds like someone's been paying attention to your capabilities." Nix nodded once, a gesture that communicated understanding without revealing emotion. "Any idea what kind of mission?" "The kind where they don't brief non-essential personnel," Thorne replied, then paused. "For what it's worth, I misjudged you. That was impressive shooting." The admission cost him something, visible in the slight tightening around his eyes. Pride was expensive in the military, especially when it had to be surrendered in the face of demonstrated superiority. Nix accepted the concession with grace, recognizing the significance of the moment without making it more uncomfortable than necessary. "We all have our specialties," she said, turning toward the pilot's quarters with measured steps. "See you around, Thorne." The corridor stretched ahead like a pathway into uncertainty, fluorescent lights creating pools of harsh illumination that emphasized the institutional nature of their surroundings. Her reflection moved alongside her in the polished floor, a ghost image that seemed to carry the weight of every decision that had led to this moment. The rifle across her shoulder felt heavier now, not from its physical mass, but from the responsibility it represented, the visible symbol of capabilities that others had begun to recognize and respect. At the far end of the corridor, duty officers moved about their early morning routines with the mechanical efficiency of people accustomed to functioning in the liminal space between night and day. The base never truly slept, its mission requirements demanding constant vigilance and preparedness. But there was something different in the air now, a subtle shift in atmospheric pressure that spoke to possibilities previously unconsidered. The mission briefing would come in a few hours. Until then, she had time to consider what had transpired on the range, to analyze the intersection of skill, circumstance, and opportunity that had aligned to create a moment of perfect demonstration. The target still rang with the echoes of 3 precisely placed shots, each impact a statement written in the universal language of ballistic precision. In her quarters, Nix secured the M24 in her personal weapon locker with the same methodical care she'd shown during its cleaning. The rifle settled into its foam-lined case like a sword returning to its scabbard, ready for the next call to action. Through her window, the eastern horizon showed the first pale suggestions of dawn, painting the sky in watercolor shades of possibility and change. The shooting had been about more than marksmanship. It had been a declaration of capability, a demonstration that transcended the narrow categories others used to define her role and function. In a world where perception often mattered as much as reality, she'd just rewritten the narrative others had constructed around her abilities and limitations. The consequences of that rewriting would ripple outward in ways she couldn't yet anticipate. Her reflection in the darkened window showed a woman poised between worlds, between the precision of individual combat and the broader canvas of aerial warfare, between the assumptions others made about her capabilities and the truth she just demonstrated with 3 perfectly placed shots. The distance between perception and reality had been measured in 3,800 meters of empty space, bridged by bullets that carried more than kinetic energy. They carried the power to change everything. Dawn was breaking as Nix made her way to the officers' mess, the sky transforming from black to deep purple to the pale gold that preceded sunrise. The base was stirring to life around her, the familiar sounds of morning formation and equipment checks creating the soundtrack of military routine. But beneath the surface normalcy, she sensed undercurrents of change, whispered conversations that stopped when she passed, glances that lingered longer than standard military courtesy demanded. The mess hall buzzed with the controlled chaos of breakfast service, steam rising from industrial coffee, urns like incense in a mechanized cathedral. She moved through the serving line with efficient purpose, selecting items that would provide sustained energy without the crash that came from processed sugars and simple carbohydrates. Combat had taught her to think of food as fuel rather than comfort, each meal a tactical decision that could affect performance hours later. Lieutenant Marcus Kane intercepted her before she could find an empty table, his approach marked by the nervous energy of someone carrying urgent information. Kane served as the colonel's aide-de-camp, a position that made him privy to command decisions before they filtered down through normal channels. His presence at her breakfast meant official business was brewing. Captain Vega. Kane's voice carried the formal tone of someone delivering orders rather than making casual conversation. Colonel Restrepo requests your immediate presence in the Tactical Operations Center. Bring your flight gear and personal weapon. The request was unusual enough to raise questions, but Nix simply nodded acknowledgement. Roger that, Lieutenant. Any indication of duration? Pack for extended operations, Kane replied, the weight of his words settling between them like stones dropped into still water. And Captain, the Colonel mentioned something about your recent range scores. Word is you've been holding out on us. The implications hung in the air as Kane departed, leaving Nix alone with her half-finished breakfast, and a growing sense that the night's shooting demonstration had set wheels in motion she couldn't yet see. Extended operations could mean anything from a week-long training exercise to a deployment that would take her back to the places where she'd first learned the cost of precision under fire. She finished her meal in contemplative silence, mind already shifting into the tactical planning mode that had kept her alive through 3 combat deployments. Whatever was waiting in the Tactical Operations Center would require the same combination of skill, judgment, and adaptability that had defined her career to this point. The only certainty was that the colonel wouldn't be requesting her presence without good reason. The walk to the TOC took her past the motor pool, where mechanics were already beginning their daily maintenance rituals. The rumble of diesel engines warming up provided a bass note counterpoint to the higher-pitched whine of auxiliary power units spinning to life. The base was a symphony of coordinated activity, each section contributing its part to the larger mission of projecting American power across global theaters of operation. The Tactical Operations Center occupied the most secure building on the installation, its windowless concrete construction designed to survive anything short of a direct nuclear strike. Multiple layers of security controlled access, from biometric scanners to armed sentries who checked identification with professional courtesy backed by lethal capability. Nix's clearances opened doors that remained closed to 90% of base personnel, granting her access to information classified at levels that could reshape understanding of current global threats. Colonel Elena Restrepo commanded the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment's most forward-deployed squadron, a collection of pilots and aircraft tasked with missions that existed in the gray spaces between conventional warfare and covert operations. Her office adjoined the main operations floor, positioned to provide immediate oversight of developing situations, while maintaining the privacy necessary for sensitive communications. When Nix entered, Restrepo was studying a collection of satellite imagery spread across her desk like tarot cards, revealing an uncertain future. "Sit down, Captain." Restrepo's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected lives measured in dozens rather than individuals. "We need to discuss your unique qualifications." The phrasing was careful, diplomatic in the way that suggested classified information hovering just beyond direct statement. Nix settled into the offered chair with professional bearing, her posture reflecting attention without tension. The satellite images on the desk showed terrain she didn't recognize, mountainous country with steep valleys and limited landing zones, the kind of environment where helicopters earned their reputation as flying coffins when operated by anyone less than expert pilots. "Ma'am, I'm not sure I understand the reference to unique qualifications." Restrepo's smile carried grim amusement. "Don't be modest, Vega. Your shooting demonstration this morning was witnessed by more people than you realize. Night vision optics have a way of multiplying audiences." She gestured toward the satellite imagery with professional economy. "We have a situation developing that requires someone with very specific capabilities. Someone who can deliver precision fire from aerial platforms, while maintaining the marksmanship skills necessary for ground-based operations." The mission parameters were becoming clearer, painted in the spaces between official statements and diplomatic language. Multi-domain operations requiring both aerial and ground-based precision fires suggested targets of extreme value and corresponding danger. The kind of mission that appeared in classified after-action reports rather than public citations, where success was measured in strategic objectives achieved rather than headlines generated. "What's the operational area?" Nix asked, studying the terrain features visible in the satellite imagery. "Hindu Kush region," Restrepo replied, her tone carrying the weight of geography that had claimed American lives for 2 decades. "High altitude, extreme weather, limited support infrastructure. The kind of place where individual competence matters more than organizational resources." The mountains in the images seemed to loom with malevolent intent, their snow-capped peaks catching satellite sunlight like teeth in a predator's smile. Nix had operated in similar terrain during her previous deployments, learning to